comfortable. Okay, I have some very basic slides to share. Is that good now, Stephanie? Awesome.
Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, go through the process of sharing, panicking because I see a million things. Okay. Hopefully that is working for everyone. Just as a bit of context, I can't actually see you guys. I just have the one screen in front of me. So if there are any issues or anything, just please put your mic on and kind of shout out at me. All right. So welcome everyone. Welcome to this panel session on the future of open science. So as we know, sort of the early developments of cool innovations like the Psychological Science Accelerator and the Thought Project and so on, these things kind of were born out of conversations had often at SIPS. So I think it's really cool and important that kind of 10 years later, we talk about where we might be moving, where we might be going forward with this kind of open science initiative. So I'll first introduce the panelists, the panel members, and then quickly mention what I would like the format to be. But I'm also kind of flexible with the format as well, so that's not shouldn't be too stressful. And then we'll get right into it. So in terms of panelists, we have Dr. Scheel, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Methodology and Statistics at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. We have Dr. Nicholas Coles, who is an assistant professor at the University of Florida and is also director of the Social Science Collaboratory. We have Dr. Barnabas Szaszi, who is an assistant professor and head of the Behavioral Science Lab at ELTE in Budapest, in Hungary. We have Dr. Lukas Röseler. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Lukas, I apologize if I butchered that. Who is a postdoc at Munster University and is also managing director of the Munster Centre for Open Science. And then last, but certainly not least, we have Stephanie Lee, who is a senior writer at the Chronicle. If my assumption is correct, I believe she's joining from San Francisco as well, where it's quite early in the morning for Stephanie. So thank you for that, much appreciated. We have 4 topics to cover. Maybe we won't cover all of them. Maybe we'll cover them quite quickly. I'm not too sure. But effectively, I'd like to go through each and ask for the individual perspective of each panelist, basically. But as I say, the structure doesn't have to be too rigid. So if people have any thoughts, just feel free to kind of jump in with them, I guess. At the end of each topic, hopefully we'll have time for some questions. I'll try to figure out how I can see the chat from my end.
I can help you.
Yes, please, Katja. That would be awesome. Thank you very much. So yes, at the end of each topic, there'll be hopefully some time for any of the audience members to jump in with any questions or thoughts that might be prominent. Yeah, so that's it. So, oops, let me just skip ahead. One here, maybe. There we go. Cool. So the first topic that we would like to cover, how can we create sustainable incentives for open science practices? So just anecdotally, I think it's not really hard to incentivize kind of the converted or the people who are sort of already on the ship. Recently, I had one of my undergraduate students who wanted to publish their undergraduate project. They did a really cool study with eye tracking and vape packaging. And when they came to me and said, I would love to push this forward and try and publish the thing, my mind immediately jumped to the fact that we didn't do a pre-registration for the project itself. So I think it's maybe not too difficult to incentivize those who are already kind of on board, let's say. But the challenges still exist for bringing people on who are not already. So yeah, it would be great to hear the panelists' thoughts on that. My idea was that we would just kind of go in order as we see here. So starting with Anne, then Nicholas, then Barnabas, Lukas, and Stephanie. And yeah, each of you guys could maybe just give your perspective on it. I would love to hear it.
All right, so that's me first then.
Yes, please.
All right. Well, I think this is clearly an extremely important question for why we're all here, right? So I personally think there's kind of two. Okay, wait, sorry. How do I start? I think we usually talk in this space about incentives for doing the good things, right? So for doing the good stuff, giving people badges or recognizing certain open practices on a certain level. My personal take is now that after we've been trying this for a while, that a pervasive problem we have is that not adhering to open science practices still gives people can give people a leg up. So even though in some cases, we can say pre-registration has become so normative, not having it might be frowned upon or something. So maybe there's some repercussions for you if you don't do these things. But I think in many cases, people still benefit from not doing it. So for example, not sharing their data and kind of exploiting a big data set by themselves. And also still being able to p-hack their data. I think we still see that a lot. And so I think in my mind, I don't think we're going to get to the point where we want to get without those things not working for people anymore. So I think there has to be, even though that's not a very popular topic, but I think it's not just about rewarding people for the good stuff, but it's also that we have to, in my mind, police and punish the bad stuff more than we currently do.
Awesome, thank you. Nicholas.
Yeah, hard to argue against this idea that scientists have done a remarkably poor job at self-policing their methodological and epistemic practices. So just want to sort of immediately say, yeah, agree with everything that Anna has already pointed out. And also, really, I think the best thing that I can say to add to this is that, we can think about this within the broader theories of cultural change. I think the Center for Open Science did a really good job at developing one that I think sort of served as a guiding light for many, many years, which is to make it possible, then make it easy, then make it normative, make it rewarding, and make it required. And the only thing, that sort of popped in my head when I reflected upon the way that those sorts of theories of change have guided, the past of open science and might also guide the future of open science, I feel like the big principle that I saw in those first 10 years was that the community actually did something to make all of those things happen. And so similarly, if we want to modify the theory of cultural change, it's going to require us, unfortunately, to do the hard work again. So, we did things like make Tenzing to make it so that we could transparently document contributions. We built the Psychological Science Accelerator, many babies, the many labs, et cetera, and made it so that open science and rigorous practices were mandated and were normative for participating in those highly influential and rewarding initiatives. And if we want to expand that, we're going to have to come back together at places like SIPS. We're going to have to strategize about how we're going to do it as a community. So those are my minor additions to Anna's beautiful thoughts.
Awesome. Bona?
Okay, just for case of transparency, I just had a meeting with Nicholas 15 minutes ago. So my biggest fear was that we are gonna be so synced that he always tells the stuff that I plan to say, and this is what really happened here because I had in my notes the beautiful thing that Open Science Framework said about incentives, and I think they did it like a very nice way. So one additional thing that that I have in mind though that we are talking about open science and. For me, it's not very clear what we are talking about when we are talking about open science. Basically, when I think about open science, I just want to do good science, and doing it openly is kind of by default. This is the good thing, and many of us who are here were like kind of rebels in our respective field who started this, started doing everything openly, and for us, it's very natural to do something new, but now this, at least in my own bubble, this became mainstream. But now I really feel that if I want to do science in a good way, there are now much bigger problems that we have to face. So basically, I don't see really that there is an incentive structure which only works for open science, but the incentive structure should be like proper for broader for the whole science. So from starting from the the funding and journals and the views and so on. And being open is like one dimension of the whole picture here. So it's really hard for me to. So I really think that we should rather focus on the big picture and how to do good science. And I think by default it has to be open. So it's a little bit kind of funny that here we are like early career researchers, but most of this kind of changes. So we do not yet have the institutions to make these big financial decisions or like cultural changes. So for me, the big question that what can I do at in my lab or in my life, but I do not know. I don't know yet any good suggestion on for those who can make the decisions. Yeah. That's what I have in my mind for now.
Sounds great. Thanks. Lukas?
Yeah, so I'm trying to figure out how to not be redundant with that, with what has been said already. So I do think that much of the work we are already doing, we just have to keep on doing, and we will get there eventually. So I don't think we necessarily have to change the strategies entirely, but this is certainly also field specific, right? So communicating with somebody in economics or in linguistics or philosophy is entirely different from people in psychology. I think psychology is very homogeneous, but I think we can maybe be a bit stronger about the communication. So not just saying that this is what we understand as good science, but also explain that this is also responsible handling of tax money, right? So if I publish my data and others can reuse them, then we don't have to waste time for other participants and bother them again with the same questions, provided everything is fine and there's no other need to replicate things. But also, if I choose to publish research at NHB, it's 10,000 euros when there's other outlets which are they have the exact same quality because they have the exact same reviewers, and that's free. And then it's also accessible to everybody, also everybody who paid the tax. So I think that is something that we can keep arguing with, because what I'm afraid of is society frowning upon science and saying, guys and people, what are you doing with our tax money? This is a public good, right? So why does the concept of paywall even exist in this area? So I think that is something where we can be a bit stronger. And then what I mentioned with just keep doing the stuff that we do. I mean, we heard about Arne Dreber and Felix Schönbrot's initiative, the rescue framework. This is just getting started. And I liked when Felix said, if you are in a committee where they select the professors, just try to sneak it in. You don't have to replace everything that is there, but just ask them to include that. Because what I think about most open science arguments is that you just can't argue against them, because everybody knows that this is better, and it's better not to count citations and to look inside the articles instead, for example. And then there's Quora, there's SF-DORA, and it's just about delivering on what we have committed to so far. And then we have the policymakers. I think we need to get them to flick the switch. I mean, in Germany, we have one big funding agency, and everybody says they are the last ones to move. So the scientific societies, they have to say, come on, let's do something about it. Why don't all publicly funded publications have to be free open access? Why don't you ask that from everybody? And then they say, yeah, we don't make requirements. Scientists have to come to us and tell us what to do. So let's do just that, I guess. And then one thing that we are trying out at my university right now to convince people, especially from fields beyond psychology, to engage with open science is positive reinforcement. So in Germany, we have this term of excellent research, and I couldn't find anybody who could explain it to me so that I could understand. So maybe I'm just stupid, but because it's such a vague term, I think you can hijack it and say, open science can make your research excellent, because that's what everybody's looking for. Open science can be a competitive advantage, because this way, and we've seen this in all kinds of projects at SIPS and also other communities, I'm seeing this at Ford every week, you're building such a great and large community with so enthusiastic people, and being part of that is a huge competitive career advantage, because there are so many opportunities and so many great projects that everybody can just get involved in. It's not like an exclusive club, but it's open doors and many opportunities. And I think I talked too much. Sorry.
Absolutely not. No apology needed. Awesome. Thank you, Lucas. Cool. Stephanie, I know you'll have an experience that's maybe a little bit different to the other panel members, but any insights from the world of journalism?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having me on the panel today. It's great to be here with all of you guys. As the journalist on this panel, it's not my role to propose solutions for the open science movement or to advocate for all open science practice to be adopted unequivocally, right? So just want to reframe the question for my particular purposes. I can comment regarding the question of how to incentivize open science practices further. I would say, let's look at the incentives that have worked so far. So we can take, for example, the publishing of raw data that has become a more common practice over the last decade due to a couple different factors, requirements from journals and funders to publish it. There are databases available on which to host it, and there is a growing social shift, cultural shift toward encouraging it, normalizing it, and noting its absence. We've also seen high-profile anecdotes of open data being useful in uncovering problems, to An's point earlier. So the Institute for Replication has been uncovering lots of apparent fraud in studies in economics journals linked to a researcher in Australia, because those journals for years required data to be published along with the studies. A couple years ago, when Data Colada reported finding apparent data fabrication in studies from Dr. Francesca Gino at Harvard Business School, it was based on just what was in the papers themselves, and it became clear, though, that the whole thing could have been cracked open a lot faster if the raw data had been available. So I think that combination of factors is generally how any practice becomes considered sustainable. There is, first and foremost, bottom-up grassroots enthusiasm and social pressure from communities like this one. Then that combines with institutional top-down requirements, and then the introduction of resources and support from both the grassroots and institutional levels. And the two blend together, where, for example, reformers take on positions in institutions, right? And I think this is timely to bring up because the institutions that fields can count on or are used to dealing with in a particular way aren't changing. In some cases, I'm referring to the U.S. government and the federal science agencies over here in the States, which, for example, this spring have been taking tons of data sets offline. And so the open science community may have to reckon with how to, for example, create that infrastructure to make up for the lack of help from the U.S. government.
Awesome. Thank you very much, everyone. Yeah, I think the one of the important things that I picked up from what you were saying just now, Stephanie, is kind of the cultural shift in kind of noticing when it's noticing the uptick and the adoption of these practices, but also noticing its absence, kind of noticing when it's not there. And yeah, I think what Anne was saying about kind of, I guess, switching from getting people incentivized, kind of getting people on the bandwagon, to actually being better at kind of policing when it's not there. There kind of needs to be incentives to do, in the initial stages. It's good to have the incentives to do the thing, but now we need to with our power, we need to bring the iron fist down sometimes. Fantastic. Okay, so Katja, was there any questions or anything in the chat, or is there anything that anyone else would like to contribute before I move on to the second discussion point?
There are no questions, but are we allowed to ask questions, right? The public?
Sure.
Yeah. Because I had a question in mind to all of the panelists. I don't know who would like to answer, but you were talking about incentives and also how to reward this behavior. And then some of you said about kind of punishing, policing, trying to do audit to find mistakes. But my question is, what do you think exactly about this punishing the researchers who are maybe involved in questionable research practices? And there is a good mix, then a good could be collaboration between researchers and journalism, because then you get journalists can explain it to public in their language so that they understand what happened. But what if it was a wrong accusation? What if someone has been accused wrongly, and do you think would be a right approach to go into these directions, or maybe just to use reward or no reward? Or would you see also a sense in punishing researchers, like with data Clelland? There were many news about this, but there were also other cases where it was not really fair to talk about some researchers.
It's a question for me, it seems like.
I think, yeah.
I guess so. So, I mean, I can talk about how journalists generally vet allegations of apparent data fabrication or you know, errors, fraud, whatever's in that category. If someone brings an apparent situation of concern to me, I vet it as much as I can, which is to say, I'll show it to different experts with expertise in statistics or the particular field or whatnot. And I always try to get a variety of opinions and perspectives on what it is that I'm seeing. I also am interested in, to the extent to which somebody may have already tried to report something to the author directly, to the journal, to a university, and what response was, taken by that respondent. Maybe they did acknowledge there was an issue, but didn't act on it. I always ask the person who's being accused of making such an error or committing fraud to give a response and to talk about their side of the story. So it's never just somebody emails me like, hey, I think Lucas's research is bad, and I like put it online. Generally that's just like not good practice. That's like push you open to lawsuits and things like that. So I would try to vet allegations and to stress at what stage they are on the spectrum from preliminary to like substantiated, and going toward the ones that are more substantiated generally.
Awesome. And then Anne?
Yeah, maybe since I brought up the punishment in the beginning with, maybe a little clarification. So to be clear, it's not for the majority of cases, I'm not thinking about technically like punishments, like you have to sit in a quarter for a week, or you're not allowed to apply for funding or something. I mean, that should be reserved for cases of misconduct, obviously. I do think that we might consider expanding our definition of misconduct, because I do think some of the things we currently call questionable research practices actually could be construed as fraud. Although I also recognize that we can only really make the classification for things that we can really meaningfully determine if it was fraudulent or not, right? So that's always the problem, and I guess Stephanie could say more about that problem, but more generally, more broadly, so when we're really in the gray zone and not in the red, what I'm thinking is that just the standards of rigor must be should be much higher in general. So what I have in mind is that people who don't engage in certain practices, or who are actually kind of trying to game the system, right, that it shouldn't work as well for them as it currently does. That is kind of my main point. And you can achieve that in different ways. You can do that by trying to give other people a much bigger leg up, but I think that is a harder way. And I think it also needs to be so that certain things just don't work anymore, such that I think maybe one of the best examples is psychological science, currently has Simin Wazir as editor-in-chief, and she's put through a lot of reforms, a lot of additional checks in terms of transparency and rigor. And I do think on that front, it has become harder to publish in psychological science than it was. And I think things like that should be much more widespread.
Fantastic. Okay. If there are no more questions, and just on the interest of time, we'll move on to the second topic. Awesome. So, topic 2. What are some of the biggest cultural barriers to adopting open science practices? And effectively, how can we overcome these barriers? How can they be addressed? So maybe some of the things that spring to mind for me is there remains a tendency for kind of flashy findings over kind of reproducible findings in general. Maybe some of you in your individual academic circles may have noticed a kind of a power dynamic thing, or a kind of seniority resistance, where open science practices are kind of still seen just as kind of a barrier to productivity, or something along those lines. So yeah, I'm very interested to get your guys' thoughts on this. We could maybe go, I don't know, we could do the same order again. Sorry to put you on the spot, Anne, every time.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this is one where I'd also maybe, I think where I'm interested in other people's takes, and so would maybe have more ideas later. Cool. But I think some of the things that come to mind, I think issues that hinder progress in science more generally. One example that is on my mind lately a bit is that in some the academic system is not very flexible in terms of hiring and promoting people, right? We all know it's kind of overly competitive because there are too few jobs, and then the way those jobs are allocated, there's not a lot of room there to try something out, right? And I think the more rigid the system, the more conservative the choices will be that people make for giving the very few jobs to someone. And I'm thinking currently of and I think this is broadly true for academia, maybe across the globe, but there are still differences between systems. One of the most rigid systems I know is German academia, where the jump from postdoc to professor is really extremely big, but then you've also really made it, and there are very few professor positions. And the process takes ages and is very difficult to complete. And my observations over the last few years have been that the professor positions are being filled with early career researchers who are not very progressive at all. And that might be anecdotal evidence. I don't know if that would hold up in a rigorous empirical study. But I think it makes sense from that perspective that these jobs are so rare. And then once you've selected someone for a professor position, you're stuck with them for the rest of their career, more or less, right? And so the people who make those choices are much more likely to select for people who do things like they have done them themselves, and are less likely to try something new, right? And the contrast may be myself in the Netherlands, where the system is less rigid. There are levels: assistant professors, associate professors, full professors. Assistant professors it's kind of an easier step to get into the system, and I do have the impression that there's also more diversity among assistant professors in a certain sense, so they don't all have to fit the same mold. Yeah, so that's one, maybe one to start with.
Sounds great. Barnabas, do you maybe want to have a go at reading Nicholas's mind this time around?
Okay, I can do that. So probably there are a lot of cultural differences and like systemic differences between countries, but to me, probably I can mostly circle back to our prior question, because I see the biggest problem is the misalignment of personal incentives with community incentives, or the incentives of science. And I think there are differences between these misalignments between countries, but basically that's the big issue for me, that the number of reviews I do personally probably for me would be I would benefit for doing less reviews and writing more papers, and to what extent I prepare my data, even more how big overclaims I make from the papers. These are like probably in the short term it would benefit my career, but probably not science. So for me the big question is that what can we do with that? And how can we push ourselves and other people towards aligning with the broader goals of science? So I also do work in behavioral change, and behavioral change, one thing is, one of the basic rule is that we should never trust the willpower of people. So we should never build on it and at this point in science, everything is built on the willpower and the nobility and this very noble principles that we share, who are here, and still we are very fallible people. I know about myself that I am. For example, probably these days we have read about this big study, consensus study about social media. So the effect of social media on adolescent youth. So there is a lot of talking about this on Blue Sky and Twitter. And I also read this, and I had some concerns, but I saw that some of the people who wrote it are like kind of my friends, and I really trust them on other issues. But still, I had this feeling that something was not good. And I also, in my own life, I follow the advice, the Latin advice that amicum secreto admoni palam lauda, which means that correct your friends in private, and praise them in public. And but after that, I read a lot of comments from other people, from like Brian Nosek and others, who started to question many of the claims. And then I questioned myself that, hey, was I doing here the right thing? Because I was kind of afraid of my personal connections with these people and so on. And this is like it's like a cultural question, that what's the proper thing for me to do in such situations. And maybe there is no big conclusion here, maybe just a small one, that probably the only thing I can do at this point, for example, to change that, is to change my small environment and set an example in my lab, for example, for my PhD students and for my RAs and so on, that they can like always criticize me publicly, or not the point is criticize me publicly, but criticize me in a obviously in a normal tone, but we can always have this conversation, and it's no problem, and that's the way how science proceeds. And the more we do that within our small environments, within our labs or within our departments, probably that will be the norm, and social and cultural change can come. And this was just an example for one change, which was like very personal for me, where I felt that I failed my own principles. But yeah, that's all. Nicholas, did you wanted to talk about the same stuff?
I'd love to use this as an opportunity to publicly criticize Barnabas for stealing my ideas, and to suggest that when you share your ideas openly with Barnabas, they get stolen. No, that's so, well put. And I think maybe Barnabas, all I can say is just like say why I'm in agreement, which is that I feel like this just kind of comes down to this idea of academia and its current form is a very selfish game. I think if we actually did like preference for like value revealing preference elicitation tasks, we would find that most academics would happily prioritize getting a grant over doing good science, or happily prioritize getting tenure over doing good science. And so it's honestly quite shocking that we don't expect researchers to just be engaging in fraud all of the time. I don't think that good science is consistent with the values. And I don't think that we're even really taught to think about the values of science. There's just this assumption that we care about doing good science. But the number of times that I had a formal conversation about what good science is outside of SIPS is like very, very, very small. And so I really feel like if, you know, to kind of your point, Barnabas, of like, don't underestimate the willpower of a community. Don't underestimate the willpower of a group of scientists who actually are committed to doing good science. We just have to convince them that those values matter.
Mm. Yeah, for sure. Lukas?
Yeah, I think Barnabas pointed out something that I strongly agree with. So I'm thinking of it as the culture of criticism, and also thinking of the time when I photoshopped a pub-peer comment and sent it to my colleagues just to get their feedback on how does it feel to be a replication target. So I did tell them this is just a mock-up, but of course they didn't read the caption and were like, oh God, I was a replication target and it failed. And yeah, it feels bad. And I think that's one part of the problem. And that's also why the Institute for Application, for example, they do not target individual studies. Every single article that is published at NHB, Psych Science, and so on, they are all the target. All of them are nominated for reproduction. And I think that is a very, very good idea. And then another very big problem, I think there has been something about the paywalls in the chat again. It's the coordination, I think. So I think Björn Brems told me something that like there were 8 million scientists in the world, but we only have about 5 big publishers. So for them to coordinate, it's very easy, but for us, it's something else. And in my experience, even having one single department, not even one university, to critically reflect on these transformative agreements with the publishers is so difficult. Like many of my colleagues and professors thought that transformative agreements means that we can publish at these journals for free. Not that it's just a 20% discount, but it will rise through inflation. And I think apart from the culture, this coordination task and education and communication is a very big task.
Yeah, awesome. Stephanie?
Yeah, so the fundamental barriers I see for adopting open science practices are going to be pretty repetitive with everything everyone has already said. You know, there's barriers from journals, from funders, from universities, from scientists themselves. There's still skepticism or lack of acknowledgement among all these parties that these things are important enough to be widely required or adopted. There are still concerns from scientists that their data is going to be interpreted in a way they don't like or they don't think is appropriate. So like none of that is new. What's newer is that the field has started trying to adopt solutions to try to address these issues. So I think the field's now in a phase of realizing that the solutions themselves are going to not be perfect and are going to have to be constantly evaluated. And there's going to have to be continual search for balance between the benefits and the unintended consequences. So like I'm thinking of how pre-registrations quality varies widely, and sometimes plans are ambiguous, and it's not really possible to tell whether someone has done what they said that they would do. I'm thinking about registered reports and how more people are doing that, and there's indications that they're working as intended and that more null results are getting published. But it's not always possible to reproduce the results based on the code and data provided. And also there are some downsides to registered reports too, which is that they take control of what gets published out of the hands of scientists, right, and puts it with journals. So some scientists have tried to like revise that and develop things like peer community and registered reports, right, where scientists review preprints in their field and certain journals commit to accepting recommendations without further review. The Center for Open Science has created its own journal altogether, the Life Cycle Journal, where research appears from the day one of planning and intends to follow the trajectory of it onwards. And so like this goes on and on. I don't think there's ever going to be a day where it's like, okay, like we know all the solutions and we're good. We just have to get people to like buy into those solutions that are fixed. I think it's sort of a history of science to acknowledge their problems, come up with solutions, and then evaluate those and see if they themselves are creating problems, or evaluate if they're working, and just try to keep weighing the positives versus the negatives that might create.
Fantastic. Maybe we should go to any chat questions. Katja, was there any questions posted?
Yeah, but it's kind of already discussed in the chat as well. But maybe with, those speakers who have not answered. So what is your opinions on the expensive non-open access journals? Because those are usually those with a high reputation. So how can we tackle this current journal financing system?
I don't think I can say like very smart things that not everyone knows here, but I see that Zoltan and Diana has already linked here the PCI registered report, which I really love. So I just want to take the moment to to promote it. And again, this is also like something where I also like fail again, because obviously I have, or maybe not so obviously, but in general I really don't like this such journals that you just mentioned, and trying to not to publish there. But sometimes, for example, now I have a PhD student, and he has deadlines, and we wanted something which goes through quick because he had to finish PhD soon so he can start his postdoc in time. So we said that, okay, they are not that bad reputation, and we had the means to pay for it, so that was a good way to go. Although in principle, whenever I can, I try to go to other solutions. And the only the thing that we can and we try to do there, that we to make these other journal formats and diamond journals format happen and function. We need a lot of volunteer work, and actually if we do our reviews and editorial services at such journals, hopefully slowly they will grow and the others will die out. But for now, we have to, if you want to stay in the system, we have to play the system while changing it. So it's like what we are on the plane, which is which we feel that it's falling, and we have to repair it in the same time while we are there.
Yep. Lukas?
Yeah, just adding to play by the rules, or you drop out of the system. So probably just a hot take, but my recommendation would be for everybody who has a permanent position, whose next contract is not conditional on them publishing in a prestigious journal. My recommendation for these would be, if you are the first author on a paper, don't submit it to commercial journals. Don't review for commercial journals. If you get an invitation, go to the preprint instead and send the author your review, then it belongs to everybody. If Nature asks you to do a review and you agree, at that moment, everything that you do belongs to them. Although you are doing it in your working time or spare time, and your working time would be paid from taxpayers' money, right? So, so there are already several people also here at SIPS who boycott every Elsevier journal. And there have already been examples where an author, once the article was accepted at NHB, they said, okay, I'm not that person, I will drop out of this paper. Of course, if there's a PhD student and they do not have a permanent position and they are the first author, then it's their call. Then you should talk about that. Everybody should know that these are the rules. This is how they get tenure. But if it's not, if these things do not depend on that, that would be my maybe radical recommendation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I say, Zoltan as well, who Barnabas just mentioned, he gave a great talk on this in 2013 in Padova at SIPS. So yes, I would certainly refer you to his work on these kinds of principles. Yes, Nicholas?
I just would be remiss if I didn't use that comment to point out that a lot of the people who were helping us strategize about these things 10 years ago never managed to make it in academia, and we owe a significant debt to those people.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so do we have... Okay, one additional question here from Felix. Those with a permanent position have the highest responsibility to drive the change. Send your best papers to PCI Psychology and other diamond access journals to boost their reputation. Awesome. Yes, Anne, please.
Yeah, just another, but not related to publication, but more generally on the topic. Is one of the ideas that I thought would come later. I think one important factor, though it's difficult to change, is that the academic system is very much focused on the individual. That also came up, I think Barnabas and Nick both mentioned this and the importance of team science, right? And there's some really interesting work by Leo Tiochin, kind of model or kind of bringing in this idea that in systems where there, I should start in the beginning. There's focus on the individual, so you get promoted, you get a job as an individual researcher. It actually leads us to, it disincentivizes cooperation and it disincentivizes specialization. So this has also come up in the discussion already, right? That some people would say, I actually like reviewing, for example, right? Or I feel motivated doing this, I feel motivated doing that, but it's not what I'm supposed to spend most of my time on. If we could work together in bigger and more diversified teams, it would be much easier to make use of everybody's talents and passions, right? So that we can let people develop into different niches. But the problem is that currently every one of these individuals needs to make their own career. And so at the end of the day, if you're only contributing to another project, that doesn't pay off enough for you at the moment. And so I think getting to a point, so I think that is a big obstacle as well for a lot of good stuff. It's very difficult to change. It's very difficult to think of how can we, select teams instead of individuals in science. But there are some interesting ideas, and of course, Nick being chiefly involved in many of those.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Okay, so we're doing quite nicely on time here, actually. So if there are no further questions or comments, I'll move on to the next topic. This is a bit of a shift from the previous two topics, but I think should be equally engaging nonetheless. How do emerging technologies, so things like AI and blockchain, how do they impact, for better or for worse, the future of open science? And this is one that I'm really intrigued to get your guys' thoughts on. Me personally, I tend to be a bit of a sort of delusional optimist about AI. I tend to kind of hyperfixate on the rate of change and cool developments that we can make and strides forward and so on. But I do think this makes me blind to some of the kind of challenges and pitfalls of AI and blockchain and similar things. So yeah, this is one where I'm really curious to get your guys' thoughts. I'll leave it as an open question. Does anyone have any particular insights on this?
Are we going in order or just jumping in? Or...
Let's go in order. Why not?
Okay.
I mean, I could also suggest reverse order once. Stephanie, it sounds a bit like you have a comment.
Yeah, so we could either
invert the order.
Yeah, let's do reverse order. Okay, Stephanie.
Okay. Didn't mean to jump in so enthusiastically. Just wasn't sure. Okay, so there's so much in the scientific record to read, and it takes so much work to go through it to find errors and fraud and so on. And so there certainly is a lot of interest in like using AI to make this process simpler somehow. I'm not going to touch on the blockchain and these comments, just AI. So yeah, I can see why people would be enthusiastic about using it to make this process simpler. I think at this point, there's a lot of reason to use caution also. So maybe you all read about some tools called the Black Spatula Project and Yes, No Error. These are branded as new AI tools that analyze papers for errors. The leaders have said that they flag lots of apparent errors, but the thing is, a human still needs to verify that these are actually errors. Nick Brown had a very entertaining and disturbing thread on Blue Sky where he talked about looking at 40 papers flagged by yes, no error as having issues, and he found 14 false positives. And these are things like the bot made up numbers or said figures were missing when they were not. And so cumulatively, I can see this being potentially like a really big time waste. The Center for Open Science recently announced a contest to get people to develop algorithmic approaches that predict the likelihood of claims being successfully replicated. And that triggered some interesting discussion about questions like, for example, what if there are differing definitions of what it means to replicate finding, right? What if a study is poorly designed to begin with? What would be the point of trying to predict how well it replicates? Would an AI approach gloss over the reasons why a study might not replicate for reasons not having to do with fraud, but just depending on how a particular field approaches its topic? So those are some of the examples of AI and open science crossover that I've seen so far. But that said, there are many tools out there that I haven't mentioned, that I don't know of, that are using AI to check papers for errors or inconsistencies. So mileage may very well vary. Maybe there's an AI tool that can work really well at finding errors in like a really defined kind of study or like a very tight context, for example. But I would say basically caution as well as enthusiasm is warranted at this point.
Awesome. Lukas?
Yeah, I think Stephanie, you gave an example of how this could help and how this could do some damage, and I think it's just a tool, right? And if you have a hammer in your hand, you can do some damage, but you can also build some nice things. I was thinking of we all know this Frontiers paper with the mouse, with the image, with the AI generated image, and I think it emphasizes how important it is to double check things, so to have reproductions and replications, because if there's just a paper with no data, how could we know if this was not entirely AI generated if we weren't to independently replicate it?
For sure. Barna?
I love this reverse order. I'm far from being an expert on this topic, so I'm afraid of saying anything. But my basic view here is very similar to Lukas, and that as far as the incentives are not aligned, we will have the same situation. Probably AI will solve some of these problems, and some of the current malpractices will disappear because it will be so easy to check and so easy to do something that people just won't find shortcuts. But using that, if I have the wrong incentives, I will be able to do other stuff which are not good. So I don't think this will solve any of the major issues or will make like big cultural change in terms of whether the science will be good or bad, which comes out of it. Yeah, I think that's my main.
Awesome. Nicholas?
I think it helps to first differentiate, between the various uses of the phrase AI. So, as I see it discussed in the research world or the open science world. So there is, the use of AI technology as a research tool. And I think that is something that's getting a lot of press and a lot of interesting press, and that's been the topic of the discussion so far. But I also just want to point out that there's also, some people might say, I'm just pointing out the polysemy here, the sudden push towards black box machine learning methodology in psychology, I think kind of gets lumped into that general wave of enthusiasm for AI. So I want to point out that's a distinction as well. And then also that there's a distinction also happening between the use of AI as a tool for researchers versus AI being the thing that we're feeding. So I want to point out 3 distinct issues related to AI and only talk about one of them because everyone else, you all did a really good job talking about like the research tool stuff. I've been a little puzzled and kind of fascinated by this feeling once I realized that the things I put out there openly were being used very openly to train AI. That feeling that I had of like, well, that's not what I meant by open science. Like, oh, I didn't mean use it to drain a lake or use it to build irresponsible technology or to release that technology sooner than you thought. So I just wanted to point out, I think that's been a really fascinating part that hasn't yet popped up along this panel is that, I think the rise of AI is making us rethink some of our assumptions about the consequences of making our work openly available and have a little bit more of like a nuanced conversation of like, well, what I meant was that I wanted my work to be openly available for any valid scientific purpose, but not for some sort of commercial purpose. And it's like, oh, shoot, wish that we would have educated you all on like the various types of like open science ahead of time, because all along we could have been saying, no, you can't use it for commercial purposes. We didn't anticipate it. So I just wanted to point out that's something that's been sort of interesting to grapple with, and I don't have strong opinions on it yet, but I've been enjoying contributing to the discussion.
Fantastic. Anne?
Yeah, really, really interesting points raised already. I think especially what Nick just said is a super important one. So, I mean, I'm also far from an expert on any of these issues, so it's more my personal speculation. And I agree largely with what's been said about using AI as a tool. But what Nick just said, I think, is interesting, because I've been thinking. So if you extrapolate from where we are now, I suppose that many aspects of the research process will become increasingly automated over time. The part that is difficult to automate is data collection, especially data that can't be collected in online surveys, for example, right? So every time that we want to collect data from humans, and we actually need to go and find those humans or talk to them or do something with them, that's something that AI can't do for us. And so I think that's based on that, I'm kind of thinking, and this being one aspect, so that being harder to automate, the other aspect being that AI needs data, right? So as Nick says, that data will become more of a commodity or more highly valued than it already is, and also for different purposes, and that it might indeed impact how we think about it. So right now, we really feel like, this is a beautiful research world. We can all share our data with everybody. But I could imagine data becoming so important also for technological process that not just we as scientists, but also society might start to think differently about it and about the rules of sharing it, maybe even on, in terms of international conflicts. That's maybe a galaxy brain take, but I wouldn't rule it out.
Yeah, absolutely. It strikes me that for kind of the ways in which we train these models, they're so data hungry, and then theoretically we would be the ones putting out the highest quality data, which makes it the most valuable, and then you enter into a kind of cascade of potential downstream consequences of something like that. Lukas?
Yeah, just a follow-up question for you, Nicholas. I really like your take on your thoughts on sharing research, but only for non-commercial purposes. So, but where would you draw the line? Isn't it nice that somebody is using your research and that it's so useful that they can actually make money out of it? And what's the difference between training an AI model that people will use and ask if it's healthy for them to smoke, and then it was trained on scientific publications, versus people read a paper in persuasion psychology and then they use it to sell more cigarettes? They can already do that, right?
Yeah. Well, I intentionally abstained from providing my own opinion on the matter, which is that I do want the AI models to be trained on my thinking and my writing, because I trust that I'm committed to the quality, and I want those quality insights to make it to the public. And the publishing in journals and giving interviews with journalists was the old way of doing that, but it seems like there's an opportunity that we should in some ways want it. So in some ways, I'm trying to reflect upon that as a community of, then why does it feel so wrong? Like, why does it feel so wrong that ChatGPT stole it, that it was all stolen from us, even though, in some cases, we wanted it in the open all along. So everything that I've ever published was on SciArchive. They might have broken, you know, some publishers' copyright by taking the publisher's version, but that was supposed to be open and freely available to the public from the beginning. But I don't think that I'm exaggerating or that I'm misreading the room on like Twitter and Blue Sky, that academics in general seem quite skeptical of this. And I think it's just sort of interesting because it just leaves the open science community with such an interesting little conundrum. In some ways, AI is like the thing that shows how important what we did. Like, because you could scrape all of this data for free, that you built this thing that now people are obsessed with. But I think that we're just a little uncomfortable with how fast it moved, and that we have some sort of like intuitive gut level moral reactions that we're going to have to grapple with in the near future.
Isn't the problem that they are selling basically your stuff? So the problem, there are parallels with the current system. So we create it and the big publishers sell it. So but the same problem for me exists with AI. So I don't care if some like beneficial I don't know, governmental AI eats my papers and then helps the public to move more or stop smoking or whatever. The question is whether like ChatGPT buys my data, eats my data, and then sells it to whoever they want to sell it for, whatever purposes.
Well, I think that's why open science researchers need to, you know, really care about ongoing copyright, like discussions about copyright laws, and be informed about what those 20 million different options on OSF actually mean. You can say that you can share this for anything that is non-profit making. If that's where you want to draw your line in the sand, you're free to do so. I also would somewhat argue that in some ways making our data open is a way to ensure that people can't exclusively profit off of it. And so why I continue to make my work CC BY is because that's fine. I know that there are people on Hugging Face who are seeking to develop, you know, redevelop GPT-4 like capabilities using openly available data that could be, you know, open models and algorithms that could be made available to everybody. So yeah, I don't know. It's a really interesting conversation. I really don't know where things are going to head, but I view it as just something that I'm grappling with, and that I feel like we're just going to keep grappling with over the next few years.
Absolutely. Okay. Do we have Katja? Is there any questions posted in the chat that we could give to the panelists?
No, but I think there's an interesting remark from Felix, who said that Meta staff torrented 82 terabytes of pirated books for training. So really, this is also something I was thinking of, like, you can put any license you want, but if they want to steal your data, they will do it regardless. And another question I had to you, because in one of my colleagues who is a professor, so they tell me use AI. Learn how to use it, be good in it, and don't, because there was one comment also as well that someone tries to avoid AI as possible. I also have colleagues who avoid it because it's not good for the environment due to energy it takes. But what are your thoughts on that? Shouldn't we be really experts in AI to see what it can, what it cannot do? Because you can't stop progress after all. So it will be there.
I'm not sure if that comment was for me specifically, but
Anyone,
I think that I do feel like, you know, so I remember when ChatGPT was released, because Stephanie, I was also in San Francisco area when that happened, and was totally, you know, was with the large language model researchers who simply were not expecting it, and were not the ones advocating, you know, for not advocating that we would suddenly release this out for the public before it's been thoroughly tested and evaluated. And I remember turning to one of the people, you know, at that research center, and I'm like, I'm not a large language model researcher, so my life isn't about to become hell, but yours is. And they said, yeah, because the Pandora's box has already been opened. Okay, we can't undo this anymore. So now, instead of developing large language models and warning people about hallucinations and disinformation and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, now it's not about warning, it's about just damage reduction, trying to assess the state of the thing, trying to make some good evidence-based decisions on the fly, really, really fast on the fly, because this thing's going to move faster than the scientists will move. So yeah, I tend to have a similar attitude about it, which is that it's not a problem of my creating, and now I have to understand it, and I have to grapple with its implications.
Anyone else have any thoughts on Katja's question or Nicholas's comments? Okie dokie. Cool. All right, so again, we're still doing pretty well time-wise, and we have one more topic to cover in the final sort of 15 minutes or so. Cool. So fourth and final topic, how can early career researchers, of which there are many involved in this discussion, how can they be better supported in adopting open science practices moving forward? So from my own experience, when I did my Master of Research program in 2018 to 19, it was a requirement, for example, for me to pre-register my thesis methodology. And that kind of had a cascading effect where everything I did from that point onwards, it was always pre-registered, and always, when possible, data was openly accessible, and all of these things. And I seem to, one of my experiences is I seem to have been being praised for those things ever since, when to me, just because it's all I've ever known in my research life, let's say, I just consider that to be the standard and something that I ought to be doing anyway. But to me, it's that's one way to potentially sell it, I guess, to early career researchers. That as it currently stands, you still get praised for doing the thing that we all consider to be more or less common sense at this point. So yeah, I'm interested to hear your guys' thoughts on that. Should we do a classic, starting with Anne this time around?
Sure. Yeah. So I think, well, I mean, I think with SIPS being traditionally a place for early career researchers, I suppose that the audience also has a lot of thoughts on this and a lot of experiences and what helped them. I think it's super nice to hear that this worked so well for you, Harry, and I do think that education obviously plays a huge role, right? And with that, I think education still can and has to be expanded because it differs widely between places. Some people are lucky to be taught by science-minded people who do things like what you've experienced. In other places, it's still not part of the curriculum. I'm not sure exactly how to reach students that are just not informed by their teachers at all, because if they don't know something exists, they might also not search for it. But in any case, I think making educational resources as easily accessible and as widely available as possible is of course a really important step to this. Apart from that, I do think that when it comes to not just, being maybe a PhD student, but then actually progressing in one's career, that's when things get really interesting. And I still really worry about there being a price for that researchers, the very progressive early career researchers, are paying. So, for example, something like sharing your data and trying to do that well. So, documenting your data well, making all of your research reproducible can be an enormous effort. It can take way more time than people realize, and I think importantly, way more time and effort than most PhD supervisors realize. And if you take the same time just churning out more papers, if you can, you might at the end of your PhD look like a more competitive candidate than a person who's tried to work as rigorously as they can. That's something I'm still quite concerned about. And so I think that initiatives like, so Felix Schönbrot is here in the audience, and he's also been championing putting, I think it's come up before in our discussion as well, but putting open science criteria into and making them a part of hiring decisions, right? I think I cannot emphasize enough the importance of that, and how to weigh really good open science practices, rigorous practices, if done well, they should be weighed very heavily in my view. But it also needs to be investigated to such an extent that it's hard to fake it, right? So just to having fig leaf open science on your CV should not pass, to make sure that the right people really get rewarded for what they do.
Nicholas?
I have a lot of, I'll try to be concise with the thoughts, because I think there's a lot. I think, you know, what we're going to see as we go down this final line of panelists is like a bunch of, you know, amazing recommendations, some which have, you know, have been tried, some which are ongoing, and some which we haven't tried yet. And I would just sort of emphasize that you know, to an earlier point made by Stephanie, that if we look at what worked in the past, it comes down to community. Okay, so like SIPS started doing accommodations for good open science practices. That made a difference for me when I was on the job market, and said like, yeah, I didn't get that, you know, Rising Star Award, but the people who care about quality in science gave me accommodation. And they're like, okay, it's a line on the CV, you know, it's an award. Okay, we can say that you won an award for doing research well. And I think about, you know, why, you know, how it is that I survived those 10 years, how I got into the open science movement. Daniel Atkins's Improving Statistical Reasoning course, and all of the conversations that used to happen, I'm dating myself here, but on Psychology Methods Facebook page, and then Twitter, and now Blue Sky, you know, the community around doing rigorous science, I think is the core principle, core fundamental mechanism that's made these ideas successful in the past. So yeah, I'll end it there. And if you're in a position where you can help out an early career researcher, do it. Help them write their pre-registration, okay? Help them do the data documentation. You already have your job, so help them push theirs forward.
Yeah. Bona?
Okay. Again, I can really relate to everything that was said by both Nick and Dan. My thoughts were also, I can always just repeat myself, and I still feel that it's I think about individual incentives and group incentives, and it would be much better to somehow figure out how we should move from individual incentives towards group incentives, which would then promote collaborations, much more collaborations, and in collaborations we could check each other, and we could achieve much more things that we can do alone. And the question is, okay, we do a lot of collaborations, who we are here, how is it, as Anne said, translated into hiring decisions, so which are, I think, the core for all the early career researchers. So, okay, if what I do is not translated anyway into hiring decision, then okay, then what should I do? Do I do the right thing and I leave academia, or stay here? I was just thinking to share with you one of my craziest fantasies, which is related to that. I haven't shared this with my co-authors, some of them are here, so don't be afraid that I'm working on some large scale collaborations, and some of them. And sorry for saying this, Zoltan. I saw your comments. We hope that maybe it will be published in Nature, or at least accepted at Nature at some point, which will like skyrocket our career, and it will help us to get some grants. And my crazy fantasy is basically that, okay, once my paper is accepted at Nature, I will tell them that, okay, fuck you, I won't publish it with you. I will just put the stamps that it was accepted at Nature, and start a new journal, or go to a journal which is very proper, and make a big deal out of it. But obviously, for myself, maybe I could get even more attention for my paper by doing it, but I would screw all of my co-authors who are on the paper, because, like, for fact, I know that there are several people who really hope that one of the papers which is in the review process cheer that, okay, I need to get this accepted there in a few months, because I will have this tenure committee coming together in August, and if it's accepted, then I will get the tenure. So how can I do this? I will be very happy to be the person to like go against it. But what can I then say to the 100 co-authors who are working with me, or who are working with us? So I just drop the ball, and I will give the floor to Lukas.
Don't be afraid, Barnabas. I completely understand, and I think it's just a smart decision to go for a prestigious journal with that. If your life depends on it, like if your life in academia is requires you to follow that rule. I think publish or perish, that won't go away too soon. So we do need journals, but I also think having a journal like Collabra is already a very good start, because this is where we make the rules and not some publisher wanting to get high citations and a good return on invest. If you're an editor at a journal, then and it's not the diamond open access, then there's something that you can do. You can just ask them, can you please flip the journal? Of course, they will say no, but you will start the discussion. You will ideally coordinate with other people and reflect on what you are doing. Or if you know an editor, just ask them, why are you working for a for-profit publisher for a data analytics business that has interests that are not aligned with scientific ideals? So why are you doing this? So then you can start the conversation, and maybe we can keep the rules for now because they don't go away so quickly, but we can value open science in that matter. So that would be one idea. Also, as a disclaimer, when I did not have a permanent position, I also went for high prestige journals. And when I started my position as in the Münster Center for Open Science, I wasn't introduced as the guy who published a file drawer report and metapsychology and rewrote the entire SPSS syntax into an open source R script. I was introduced as the guy who published a meta-analysis at Psych Bulletin, and with the case of Psych Bulletin even requiring me to deviate from the pre-registration without any good reason. So again, I perfectly understand it. And I think a way to go is first to be very transparent about what people want. So they have to say, do we count citations, or do we care about open science? And also, my supervisor told me do both, because things are not changing so quickly. If you go all in on open science, you won't find a position. If you ignore it altogether, you may have difficulties too. So for this hybrid solution, we do have very good diamond open access journals that you can publish things to. So go write up a replication report, participate in replication games, and publish them at Metapsychology.
Stephanie?
So the context in which I'm most often connecting with early career researchers is when they are questioning their lab's research or practices or another lab's research or practices. And often if they are talking to me, it mean that they have exhausted the usual channels, the traditional channels of trying to get an issue resolved or even just acknowledged. So by the time they've come to me, they've contacted a journal, they've emailed, the authors of a study, and the press they see as maybe one of their last attempts to try to shine light on a problem and get something moving. So, if they're willing to go public or put their concerns forward publicly, they really care about it at this point, and they are often the ones who have the most to lose career-wise in the hierarchy of academia. So I'd encourage the community to support early career researchers who want to speak up in whatever form that takes. If you work with them, maybe you co-sign a letter to the editor of the journal that they write to. Maybe you lend a supportive quote to the reporter that they're talking to. If you don't work with them, maybe you reach out proactively and you offer support or guidance if you have experience bringing issues like that to the public.
Yeah, for sure. That's wonderful. So we have probably a couple of minutes before we wrap up. Katja, was there anything of note posted in the chat, or any questions you had yourself, maybe? Or
No, I think it was a very interesting. It's returning back to the AI. Felix wrote that the problem is that the model starts kind of learning from each other and that they get already flawed. So the key point will be how to get trusted data where universities and open science can provide this trust. So maybe you would like to reflect on this, whether you see that universities and scientists can really be, again, trying to come and save this AI fiasco. What are your thoughts on that?
Open question, I think.
Yeah, it's addressed to anyone. It's open question.
Yes, please, Anne.
Just a quick comment, because again, like I'm not the expert on the topic, but I do I would love there to be some kind of sorry, I'm blanking on the word, but certification for data, basically. So something that guarantees some level of quality and that data are legit. I think that would be very interesting for many reasons, not just for the purpose that Felix is suggesting, actually. So of course, chiefly for scientific integrity. Yeah.
Awesome.
I'll just kind of jump
yeah,
in
please go ahead
there, Anna, as well, which is that, you know, when I've tried to explore those ideas myself as well, I've often hit into that problem that like Peter Eisiger, you know, spent a lot of time, which is like which ones do you choose? Like obviously we can't like put like the stamp of approval that we have thoroughly vetted every single piece of data that's ever come out of the field of psychology. So I kind of wanted to just point some people who are, if you're grappling with a similar issue, I wanted to point to Peter Eisiger's work on that, who I think has, you know, done a lot of the intellectual heavy lifting when it comes to thinking about principled ways that we could determine where to invest our resources, right? If we're going to release some really high value data set that we think is going to be immediately used and fed into some AI, well, maybe that's where we prioritize having peer reviewers really look at that data, really look at that code. Whereas, you know, the work that I do, which you might say is useless and has no practical relevance whatsoever. Okay, fine. Maybe it's just okay that you opened up my R file and confirmed that there actually is code in it and that it actually does run and that it doesn't spit out a ton of error messages.
Awesome. I'll just check the chat here from Katie. If folks haven't seen the revised, I can't actually say that, TOP framework. The level 3 is relabeled certification of an open output. You guys can see it on screen because you can see you can see what I can see. Awesome.
And maybe the last one remark here, because many of you were to attend the session from Felix where he introduced this rescue framework where the researchers are evaluated based on how well they do open science or have open science publications. And I think this is also fits to the last point, how you can support early career researchers. So if someone who is more senior, who has a position at the university says, hey, we will be evaluating future generations based on how qualitatively good your work is then as compared to number of publications, then I think it's also a good motivation and boost.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Are there any more questions, comments, anything that anyone would like to add before we wrap up? Okie dokie. Okay, so that was an awesome panel. That was really, really enjoyable. I'd like to extend a thank you to all of our wonderful panel members who had very interesting and novel insights. And yeah, I think the point that kind of stands out to me most, and it's something that I know Nicholas mentioned a few times, is just this kind of like community and community spirit, I guess. I think just the fact that we are all here with the right intentions, I think is more important and impactful than we even realize in the moment. And yeah, this was wonderful. So we'll be keeping the conversation going, I assume, on the Slack channel where people are available. All of our panel members are easy to find, easy to access. If you want to reach out to them individually. And yeah, we will leave it there. Thank you very much again, everyone, and see you soon.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Harry.
Thanks, guys.